Not being a bass player, of course, I don't know how to play this, but can I play the old money thing? I think so. Strings are big. That's all I know. So this is the Steinberger, and I believe it's an L2. So we have two pickups, two volumes, and a tone. And it's a really simple but effective combination. Where are you? Oh, sorry, I don't have the mic thing. I've lost a little adapter. So that's a bridge pickup. On its own, the neck pickup. Oh God, what was that? That one. But you put them on. Oh, that's the neck pickup with the treble all turned off. And then both on. All I can say, my dear friends, is I love this thing already. Not being a bass player, of course, I'd have to have it right up here somewhere, but not being a bass player, I'll save you from any more of that. Not being a guitar player much either. Well, look, I like it. It feels good to me. How do I? So now I'll show you a close-up of this thing. So take you on a little journey, because this is, by all accounts, a historic instrument. I don't really have a lot of information. I've had a look on a site talking about this particular one, and this is made excuse me, this has got EMG pickups, and it's a graphite made bass, and apparently this is one of the very early ones. I think they call it an L2, and it has graphite, it's graphite fingerboard, graphite everything. So we take a little ride. So we've got these, oh, my wrist is damaged. We've got these things at this end, the string holdy thing, and you can see that this has a grub screws, room for big grub screws. So if you don't have double ball strings, theoretically this is supposed to be lockable at this end. I mean, that's quite a crushing motion, and actually for the sake of holding it nicely, I think I would be, I think the ball-ended thing here is pretty good. The only thing I would personally not like about that is that this slightly rough end of the windings gets stuck on the 0 fret here, which could be a source of damage, because it's by far the rougher bit of the string. So but then you can't, if you know, you can't, what's the word, you can't utilize the holding power of, or the advantage of using the ball ends here if you if you without having these windy bits sat on the, or the gnarly bits sat on the 0 fret. So that's kind of goes with the territory. Of course, if you go for the locking grub screws, you can pull the strings back, cut them, and you can have these clean, if you like, playing strings going over the 0 fret. So this thing is a beautiful old bass somewhere in the 80s. I've forgotten exactly what year, but this one has a provenance, I believe, of being played at some point or owned at some point by a bass player who played with Kate Bush. So that's quite something. I'm just going to look at my little notes. You stare lovingly at this for a second, because I just want to make sure if there's anything of use that I put down in here, because sort of trying to keep track of everything in its place and everything. So just bear with me 1 second. Come along now. I seem to have lost my page of notes. Now John brought me 3 different guitars. This is one of them, and also he's brought me a Aria Les Paul style guitar with bolt-on neck, and what I think feels like a fantastic parts caster, which we've kind of decided will be up for a refret. So John is a bass player more than a guitarist, I suppose. So he obviously gets more out of this than I can, because I'm just a novice. But so I like this thing for its historical value, but also I played a Steinberger before, 6-string, and to me it struck me as, although being slightly clinical, as they say, you know, you can't get much more sort of stripped back guitar than this. The 6-string I played, it struck me as being the perfect guitar. I couldn't fault it in any way. Now I could fault it in terms of it wasn't made of sexy woods, and it didn't have that sort of, you know, womanly shape that was oh so popular on guitars from the 60s onwards, or actually earlier than that, 30s onwards. But you know, so it was very minimalist in its design and so on. But I have to admit, it played and it did everything, and I just thought, well, actually you couldn't get more perfect. But it was perfect in the way that the alien in the original Ridley Scott Alien film was deemed to be perfect, you know, a perfect organism, able to survive dispassionately and coldly, drooling its way through people's spaceships and killing them all without pity. Anyway, Steinbergers don't do that, but this thing is of a sort of minimalist era, and you know, we've all remember seeing, you know, the Durans playing them, the Kate Bush's bass player. I've seen who else plays these? Sting played them, Mike Rutherford played them. In fact, there was a point where it seemed like Genesis only played headless Steinbergers, but they were all the rage. And I've just picked this up in the last couple of days, or just really, it plays great for me. Now, John brought it, and it was an interesting thing because, by the way, I hope you like this. This is the strap hanging bit, and I think you might have seen it. The strap points hang from there, and it allows you could practically spin the bass all the way around if you wanted to. Anyway, so yeah, John brought it over with the other 2 guitars, and we kind of had a discussion about it there and then. And I was kind of curious about the way, or interested in the way he described what was or wasn't the right or wrong with it. You know, if you're kind of looking to have it set up, what is it you wanted it to do? There's the 9-volt for the active pups. Look at this. I think this is a, oh, blimey, very early looking serial number. And we have it. Steinberger Sound, Sullivan Street. What was it? Number 48 Sullivan Street, Brooklyn, New York. Number 145. Very early. Apparently, all I know really about this graphite business is that they were losing money on them, or they cost more to make than they could sell them for, so they stopped producing them. But anyway, so yeah, so chatting to John about this, his impression or his sense of it was, and he's a bass player, remember, so I've got to take his word at very much face value. His impression, the way he described it to me, was, the first thing he said about it was, it's too high, and he was holding the strings at the sort of top end of the guitar at that point. So to me, I read that as the action feels too tall for me at that end. Now, it doesn't mean it's too tall for every other bass player in the world, but it sounded like that for him, it was too tall. Okay, so I thought, right, fair dues. Look at this, is cool. Look at this, by the way, before I carry on. Just look at how that scratches as it goes, as this clip goes over here. You're supposed to pull it back, I guess, but it drags across the top and then locks in place. So you've got this fabulous scrape that wears into it. But being graphite, it sort of probably takes forever to destroy it. Anyway, yeah, so the first thing was, John was saying that for him it was too high or too tall up here. And I thought, well, okay, you know, if somebody says that to me about a guitar, then I think to myself, okay, we'll look at lowering the playing action at the saddle end and then see what we can do with it. Oh, how nice. So that would be my first thought, and then he was kind of looking at it and saying, well, it's got too much of a curve in it. And I was thinking, well, okay, let's have a look. And I looked at the curvature, or the relief in the neck, and actually for a bass guitar, if you just use the sort of standard measure of capoing the first fret, or holding it down, and then having a look, you can't see from there, sorry, but having a look down here, and I'll do a measurement for this, because actually it's very, very small. So that was kind of interesting for me, because when I said that to him, I could see that his sort of response to that was, no, it can't be too small, or it's not too small, it's too much, which I thought was interesting, because that's his experience of it. And actually, what I'm seeing is that it really isn't unusually tall for, or, you know, there's not a lot of relief in there for a bass guitar. Now I'm seeing it here as about, I would say at most 0.5 of a mil, right? So that's, for a bass, that isn't a great deal. You know, you might be running about 0.2 on a guitar, and for strings the size of the bass and the amount they, the amount they swing about, bad view, just done a bit of measuring. So it's 0.5, about 0.5 relief. Yeah, for the amount of swinging around these strings have to do compared to regular six-string strings, it's not much relief at all. Now, the interesting part about the relief, and this is maybe why it's in John's kind of line of thought, is this guitar, curiously, was built without a truss rod. And so perhaps, who knows, but maybe they, maybe when let's detune it. So maybe when we take it to slack, maybe the neck goes completely straight. And then maybe the whole of this bass is designed so that they know precisely how far the neck is going to curve under load, and that's your one relief setting that you get. Now that seems to me a little bit odd, and I'm sure it does, probably sounds a bit peculiar to you as well. The idea that you would have no adjustment on a quality base like this. So that's what John's told me. I mean, and fair enough, I can't see any point of adjusting, or can't see any place to adjust a neck on here. And this, I don't see any sort of historical documents telling me otherwise. So that I find is curious. So here we have the way this attaches, and frankly at this end it's actually a bit of a what's it ache, because if we look down here and you see this low E one, to get this out we can't have the saddle back this far, so you have to put it on and then move the saddle back to your intonation point, which is something of a pain, but hey. So what I'll do before I do anything else is I'm just going to put a couple of bits of tape on here, and I'm going to mark, very carefully mark off the point where this is. It would help if I had a sharp knife. Thank you. Yeah, we'll just mark where the low E sits in this thing. Now the low E looks like it's quite a way too far back at the moment, so maybe that's moved, who knows. But I'll just sort of keep a track of it, and then what I'll do is I'll just do a similar thing over on the high side. Now I don't know exactly how this bridge works, as in how you use it in anger, so I'm just kind of going carefully by eye. All right, so typically you would expect on this you would in a what's it called, a 6-string guitar, you would have a plain G and then 3 wound, but here you've got 4 wound, so obviously they all step back usually in the same single sequence of 4 staggered. So frankly, getting this out here means we have to be able to undo this and move it along, and what we've got to enable that is we've got on the side of here we've got a couple of little screws. Now I'm informed that these are Imperial, being an American made beastie. So what I'm going to do for a minute is I'm going to go and dig around in my tools and find some Imperial hex keys. Otherwise, if I can't do it, I'm going to have to go and buy some. But the point is, well, I just sort of discuss my thought processes with this. So if it's the case, oh, sorry, one thing I didn't check or know for sure is once the strings are off this, does this indeed roughly go back to flat? And let's just have a quick sort of, well, this is too long to actually ascertain using that, so let us use another flat edge. I'll get my wherever I put my notched ruler. That would be handy if it was at least somewhere to hand, which it isn't. Yeah, here it is. Thank you. This is not for bass guitars, so I wonder if I can actually use it without it. No, I can't use it either. I need a straight edge that isn't 100 miles long. Well, frankly, I don't have one. So I'm going to have to sort of just lightly tighten this string up and use the same principle as before. But what I want to know is, I mean, it's bound to affect it, but it's still not, according to this, it's still not flat. There's a little relief gap. It's smaller because it's not pulling it over so much. But so the kind of challenge on this, part of the challenge on this, is that it's evidently, it seems to have no truss rod. It seems to be unadjustable, and therefore John's sort of take on it is, what can you do with a bass that doesn't have a truss rod, or a guitar that doesn't have a truss rod and has a permanent curvature in the neck? And they're kind of different approaches, really, because in the past I've come across that with some archtop guitars, and you know, these were guitars made with just a single piece neck, with no truss rods, not even steel reinforcements in them, and they just permanently bent over 50 years of string loading. I guess for the first 5 to 10 years they were fine, but eventually they curved and stayed curved. And what I did with those, for example, is I took the permanent curve and I planed and sanded it flat, and then refretted it, and that gave it back life. But eventually, over 50 years, it would do the same thing again because it doesn't have anything working against the string loading. With this, there doesn't seem to be any adjustment type at all. I mean, typically, if you had an adjuster in these kind of, or a headless guitar, it's often found at the end. And I don't think, even if I took this off, I would find a truss rod under there. But you never know. I'm not sure whether John said it's a fact there is no truss rod, or from a user's owner's point of view, there's no truss rod. Which might mean there could be one, but we don't know where it is. But it's not visible there. Also, don't forget we have a sort of panel here that can be undone. You never know, and there might be an adjuster sitting underneath this top cover. So I don't know. And without sort of contacting Steinbergers and all those people, I'm not going to know immediately. So let's imagine that there wasn't, although it seems like a crazy idea that there isn't. Let's imagine there wasn't. What do we do with something like this? Well, the first thing that struck me when John brought it across is that actually, even with the relief of about 0.5, you might say that's a fraction more than some people would like, but as I say, it doesn't sound to me or look to me to be too far out of reasonable range for a bass guitar. So what would I do with this? Well, taking it on what John said to me, that he feels it's high up there, I would be looking at whether we can lower the action here anymore. And then if we do lower the action here, what happens to playability then? And if we get any fret slap from lowering the action, then how can we, maybe a very careful fret level can just, like it does with the 6 strings, just gently scoop out the undulating kind of nature of the fingerboard and put a proper curve on it. And that then, you're not even in focus. What are you doing, man? That allows us to play it well. But like I say, I'm not in the least bit convinced that they would make a bass guitar of this quality without a truss rod. But unless you thought, but even if you thought this would be perfectly flat at rest, and then even if you thought it wouldn't bend at all under load of the strings, then that would be no good, because you need it to have some bend. And then if you thought, well, we know exactly how this material performs, it's totally flat or whatever at rest, then when you load it, it goes to 0.5, for example, and it never goes more or less depending, or if you put certain gauge of strings on, it goes to 0.5. If you put more heavy strings on, it goes to 0.6, whatever. And I don't really see that being a good commercial decision. Even if that were true, I don't doubt very much you would go to all the lengths of confidently predicting that, and I don't think you could predict that the neck would behave the same in every environment. So I can't get that being a realistic commercial choice. So either there is no truss rod and this was more of an experimental thing, or there is indeed a truss rod and we just don't know where it is or how to get to it. So who knows, eh? I don't. But let's imagine we'll take off the strings. Oh, what's coming out there? That's the ball bit. That's coming out. I can get it out that end fairly easily, and probably this end too. And the high E. And what we can't do is get the, we'll just keep them in the right direction the way they're set up. What we can't get is the low E out of here very easily, because we have to move this saddle here, and that depends on finding the hex key. So let me go away. I'm going to go and do a spray of a coat, spray some more thing on another neck, and I'll be back with hopefully a hex key. Right, well, here's an interesting little voyage of discovery. So I've taken the little hex key screws out, and look what we've got. Look at that. Let's take a close-up look. Dead spiders and God knows what from the old 1980s. So this has got stickers on it saying John Henry Enterprises 0171 back in the old days. So, oops, can't see anything. So look, there we are. Volume, and a tone. Or is that two tones? No, it's got to be one. That's one. Okay, it's a very old-fashioned style thing, but I guess the important bit of information is, whoops, sorry, terrible camera work. Look how lightly that's tacked onto there. Well, not lightly, sideways, I should say. But the interesting thing then about this is, go back to zoomed out, is my little initial investigation is that there's nothing under there for adjusting necks at all. That was the thing I was looking for. So I'm just going to pop all of this back in its correct place and gently put it all back on like that, which is all great. The saddles, as you can see, are off, so I can also look at those and see what scope there is for height reduction downwards. It's about 1 millimeter in the ease, I think. Yeah, so there is a little scope for reduction. Beyond that, of course, there isn't really anything other than lowering this somehow, but I think that would be, this unit could come off, and it's potentially possible you could lower it if you really wanted to, but I'm not going to go anywhere near that. So these two are the middle ones, they're longer than everything else. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a little tiny dab of grease as these go back in, because they're quite old and something sticky. But yeah, so that's the first time I've ever seen the inside of one of those, and it's pretty straightforward, but a nice simple design. The electrics sit on the upper half, and the bottom half is the neck and the kind of basic housing of everything. But as I say, not really any indication of ability to adjust the neck in any way. Also, like I say, that we're about to run out of action adjustment in the saddles, which sort of tells you that it wasn't intended to be played that much lower. And obviously I go on what John says about his experience of playing it. It feels high at this point, where he kind of indicated up there on the board. So that's all I can really go on in the sort of subjective, what it feels like to somebody else. We just work off that. So my target, since I can't adjust the neck in any particular way, my target will be to drop the saddle just a fraction and make it the best it can be, and then I will give it a very light, these grub screws, by the way, I'll grease these a little bit too, because they're a bit on the tried and sort of rusty side. Yeah, I'll drop the action that last available millimeter, which won't be a millimeter at the last fret. It'll be less than that, so it won't be a huge action gain. And we will be on the floor as far as the e-saddles are concerned, but that's not the end of the world. So I'm just lining these grub screws back up, ready to push. Now this one here, the back one, is a flat one, much flatter than the other one, slightly different. But they basically both, the job of both of them is to lock all of the pieces together, which is again a little bit sort of crude-ish. You sort of move things by hand to where you think you want them, and then you lock them in place. So I'm going to go on the basis that half a turn is whole turn, half turn is 5, whole turn is 1 millimeter. I'm going on that basis, right? So I'm going to do a complete 360 on these pieces like that, and we'll see where we get to. And if I do the same complete turn on each one of them, we'll know where we are, because we can always go back if we want to. So we're low. So that's uneven for a start. That one's sticky. Look at that. I mean, that's just what a curious thing. I mean, really, it's only got 2 points of adjustment, which is really weird. Oh well. And this one. That one's a bit sticky too. Oh, that's odd. Well, one of these is on back to front for a start. For some reason. I don't know why. One was on back to front. Okay, well, if that's my end position, that's my start position, that's my end position, I'm going to start by putting these all into a progressive stagger, which is theoretically what we'd want. But this one's, oh, how come that's sitting up so high there? Why is that? Why is that sitting up so high? Bizarre. Kind of weird setup. It really is. I suppose it isn't exactly high. When I'm looking at it, it's not really tilting up. I'm looking at the difference in height between these actual saddles, so that's what's striking me as a bit odd, but it's not really that crazy. Right, so this one is making the A seem to stand quite a lot higher than everything else in its neighbourhood. So I think we need to just tame the A a little bit, like that. That's more better, I like it. Now what I'll do is I will try and hold them all in place, because that's the name of the game. And then we'll just attempt to lock them in place, like that. Now, obviously I'm sort of spreading the saddles between the first and the last positions evenly, which is sort of what you'd expect, but the point is, if either the start or the end point is radically out, then you basically have to rediscover, go and find what the correct ones are by just testing the intonation, then taking the strings off and doing it again. And it is something of a pain, I have to say. But so I'm just tightening these up so these will stay put, and they are nicely machined, so they will kind of lock together very well. The question is do they remain as well positioned? Yeah, of course, this is the bit I was about to catch myself on. Right, he says to himself, yeah, tighten it all up, and then he says to himself, no, wait a minute, we've got to get that low E ball into the play, haven't we? So hold fire. So this is where we have to do a bit of thingying around. So we slacken this off. Don't know how well you can see or not see. Yeah, you can see. Right. So we get that one, and sorry, all my hex keys are all chucked around there. So we have to move this one to begin with. We have to get this as far wound out as we can to get the ball in there. Then we have to tighten it back up to bring it back out, which we do there. Then we readjust this one to its correct staggered position. However, we may have the same problem with the A, in which case we have to check, can we get the A in without moving it? Yes, we can. So everything else should be okay. That means I can now lock this up, holding it all again, making sure nothing goes anywhere. So okay, wipe the excess grease off. Stagger, 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 stagger. It's either gonna, there's no reason why it wouldn't work in a stagger. It's a standard staggered intonation we should be expecting. Now, what I just want to have a look at while we're here with these two, I actually don't need, maybe I do. I'm going to see if we've got a hex key that fits these, which may or may not be the case. I keep some loitering around, but I don't think they are ones I've got here. There are some imperial ones in here, typically. They're never ones I can find when I need them. Not that one. Smaller than that one, but bigger than that one. Not those. Not that one. It's too small. Too big. Too small. Somewhere in between. Not that one. That's really too small. So the only question then is, do we have a sockety version of this? What went sliding? Oh yeah, my winder uppers. Too small, too big. Too small, too big, too small, too big. That's too big. Right, so we don't have one just to hand that fits that, but we may have. Do we have in our set over here? Do we have some imperial things? Might just be the one. Why didn't I start looking in there? It's not that one. I don't think it's that one. So maybe they're not imperial after all. Not them, not them. Somewhere you always end up, you have a set of these imperial hex keys, but you never keep them out because you never think you're going to want them. So they get buried in all of this stuff here, which I'm now going to have to tidy all of it up shortly. Is that too big? That's too big for that. That's too small. That's not even a hex. I will stop this riveting film shortly because I don't think I'm going to find the right thing for it, which is okay. I will concede defeat and I have to go and look through some other hex key supplies. I'm sure I'll have one somewhere, but it's just, the question is where. Boo. Boo some more. That's no good. All right. Okay. Search for the hex key continues. The search for Lord Sugar's hex key continues. Yeah, it is none of the above. That's okay. I really didn't expect it to be. Except it's this one. Is it? That'd be funny. pretending to be, but it isn't. Right, all of that can go away. I shall go on a off-camera search, which I should have done originally anyway. It's not crucial, but I absolutely want to iron out any suspicion that there might be possibly a adjuster for the neck, because I can't believe a great forward-thinking company. No, I'm not trying to get a free guitar, but I can't believe a forward-thinking company engaged in such important R&D as these people were would omit any means of controlling the neck. You just wouldn't make out that you have that much faith in your material, that it was never going to move at all, and therefore you absolutely didn't need any way of controlling the neck. It's just, it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to turn the camera off once again and go looking for a suitable hex key. It's funny, isn't it? You go away, turn the camera off, go away, immediately find the key you're looking for. So let's put you up there, see what we can see, sort of along the desk bench thing a bit. Right, so this will be the chance to discover, does this thing feature an adjustable? I can't see how it does, frankly, because even when I get these off, there isn't any immediately obvious space for a truss rod of any kind to be hidden under here, but I'm determined to be certain, and just to be on the safe side. And I'll grease these and put them back in anyway. So no, I'll give you a close-up look at this thing from the head department. Ooh, there we have it. Can you please zoom? I can't really get it to work now. Sorry about this. I'm struggling to operate this attached to something, and it really doesn't want to focus very well. So there you are, the three threaded brass inserts that hold on the end of the string retainer end, and there's nothing under there that looks even vaguely like a that looks to be a wood, that looks like a wood finish. Have a look at that. See the grain in there? Also note the notching on the 0 fret, kind of standard. That's what you get for a 0 fret. The rest of the notches, the rest of the frets are a little bit notched as well, but nothing by comparison to the 0 fret, which is always the worst one. And that's because it sits under load 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Jimmy's looking down. Look, Jimmy's got a view on this. What do you think, Jimmy? Is this a guitar? Come on, don't be so stuck in the past. He said he'd try it. I don't blame him. I bet he would have done too, you know, without a doubt. Okay, let's get a bit of the old greasy stuff. So, right, well, there we have it. Proof, if proof be needed. There ain't no truss rod, not nowhere there ain't. Not that I was not taking John's word for it, but I had to see for myself. You get what I mean? Nice little end piece here. I do like it, I have to say. Nice and chunky. That's the kind of size grub screws that I would like for holding ordinary strings down, far less just bass ones. I find that the whole business of clamping strings to hold them in place a very suspicious practice. Just seems anything that uses brute force instead of kind of sensibleness gets me a little bit. So all headstocks should be designed to take the ball end and for it to hold the strings forces under by means of the ball end. I mean, that's what they do on a normal top loading bridge, or for example, or even a through strung bridge. You know, all the pull of the string is held by the ball, and it should do that. So I find that any headpiece, any kind of headless guitar arrangement that demands crushing a little thin piece of string metal in the hope of getting it to stay in place when you're whammy barring it and God knows what elsing it, to me that just is a bad design from the outset. That's just my personal thing, because I don't, you know, you half destroy the string in order to just make it you know, to make it stay in place. Not good. Okay, look, a little bit of the old graphite flaked off there. I'll keep it, it's history. Okay, so now you need to just push this forward a fraction to get this in. Come on, in you go. Or maybe from this side, hey, thank you. So what I'll do is I'm going to put the strings on, and the first thing I'm going to do is just see how this plays with that action set. That's the main thing, because we know that we've lowered it a very small amount, and we get a feel for it now with the slightly lowered action. And if it's improved, but there are, for example, maybe some fret slap or whatever, or any untoward things, then we can take care of that with the fret leveling. But if, for example, we've got the most action reduction possible out of it, and basically there's nothing more we can do, and even with that reduction it's not causing any buzzing or anything like that, then frankly there's not really a lot I can do beyond what I've already done, which is to lower it slightly and have a good look around, as you obviously would do, wouldn't you? Okay. Right, let's try and find a note. Can you hear it? Now, we got a problem here. What I'm noticing, first of all, is that using the ball end of these strings is actually kicking the string up much higher than it needs to be off the first fret, because the gnarled wound bit is getting in the way. It's pushing the string up, so we're getting an artificially high first fret action, which will also make the guitar feel not so good to play. So that's a consideration. So I'm going to pretend that's its actual action, its correct action, with the capo on. Now we've still got a visible amount of relief, which we can't do anything about. The capo not working, by the way. Oh, and that's also that's the string hitting the pickup, so we need to reduce the height on that a little bit in both sides. So can't be right there. So, much as I don't like the crushing crushing fixture method, I'm kind of keen for it to be used in this case, and the reason for it being, I don't think I've got the hex keys that will fit this, but the grub screws that will fit this. The reason I would suggest that we need to use it is that I'll show you a close-up. It's a problem it'll make the action harder down here, and that may just be part of the overall thing. Okay, so can you see how that's the sort of wrapped null bit is going over the first fret, and as a result I think it sits up higher over that first fret than it should do. Maybe not a ton higher, but a little bit higher. It's kind of kicking it up, and all 4 strings are just about on their nulled, twined up bit, so I think they all have a slightly higher action than they need. Obviously what the manufacturer has done here is used a higher gauge of fret anyway than, higher gauge for the 0 fret than for the first fret, which is fairly traditional. But that to me, given the overall geometry of this guitar, that to me seems quite a lot higher than it should be. And I would recommend, that's over 1 millimeter in my books. I think that would be a fair bit lower, about half that, if this wasn't going over with this stiffened bit, because it's pushing it up in the air. It's not sitting cleanly on there. So I would basically pull these back and clamp them on the clean string, or I'd use regular strings, by the way. I suppose if I had the hex keys for this, the grub screws, I could put a different set of strings on temporarily to kind of make the point, really. But I've got a feeling I don't have anything that size, certainly not in the Imperial measurement department. I've got some, the funny thing is they don't actually have to be standard hex keys. They could be, as long as they fit the thread, they could be bolts, hex bolts that you wind in and push down on, but they are quite large. I think this sort of size, gosh, it is, isn't it? It's not far off that. That is one, that's one. We could do a test with one. Oh, where did that come from? Whose is that? That's not a part that I ever would have imagined having or using. I got them here as well. What are they for? Who knows? But given the size of them, are these equivalent to them? They're not far off, are they? They might be a tiny bit loose. These are M5s. Those little hex keys, those little inserts. Not there, not there, not there. All I'm really looking for doing, even if it's not the exact ones, I'm looking for one that I can use just to hold a string in place, which could be this little test one, the dummy one here. What have we got here? Let's have a look at, that's not the right one. What are these doing? Could be the right one. I mean, it sort of does it, but it's a bit loose. Okay, all I really want is just one that will hold it for the time being. Let's just try something. Right, first of all, let's measure. Probably going to nth degree with this, but I'm curious. So let's measure the current first fret gap. Sorry, fly you around here. Fly you to the nut. Let me see the measurement. Da, 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 da. Right, 70, 95. That's a bit high. So it's 70, 95. Let's go to 85. That's probably about that, which I think is probably too much, but you never know. 15, 70, 15 is 85. Is that really? No. Okay, let's go 70. Not too bad then. Okay, I'll let it off. It's less than I thought. It's looking to be about 60.6, which is twice the electric guitar level. And in which case, I think I would still probably, I think it will go down if we used a different one. Yeah, all right, I'm not going to do that little test, but I think you can reduce the action by refitting the grub screws as it's designed, and making sure that clean string goes through there, not the kind of gnarled, bendy string. So take the action down a little bit, and then next thing we're going to see oh. Okay, so at its lowest, that chokes out a bit, and it isn't the greatest playing action in the world, or it's not playing brilliantly at that action. But that, it's hard to tell exactly why, whether there's a little kink up there in this, because it shouldn't be that choked up. So we dropped it a millimetre at this end, so about 0.75 of a mil, or half to 0.75 of a mil here, which is, I suppose, it's not a tiny adjustment. So my test that I was lining up to do is, can we level out, very carefully level out the slap? And so the aim would be to give John back a better playing action, because that's the thing he noticed or described to me, being too high at that end. Can we reduce the playing action a little bit, and in doing so, can we clear up the any buzzing and so on? Now, what I'm trying to be careful to do is to keep the marker pen off the strings, because this is the only set of strings I've got for this undertaking, so I'm going to need to try and keep them as clean as possible. I think I may finish this tomorrow, but what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start by, while we're on camera, by doing a very small amount of careful leveling, not to level frets, although there may be a little high patch at the end here where that little kind of choky buzz sound was coming out, but more to take advantage of what this method of fret leveling seems to do, which is to allow the curve of the truss rod to map itself onto the curve of the frets, or the the curve of the fretboard, I suppose you could say. And in doing so, it just creates a little bit more space. I would say that at this point, it's a pretty low action from you know, compared to basses I've seen, but I'm not a bass player, so I don't have the, you know, not as much experience as John at all. So, you know, if it doesn't seem a you know, a normal sort of action to him, and I'll take his word for it, don't take mine. But we shall see whether we can improve it a little bit. You know, having dropped it by 3/4 of a millimetre at the, as measured or felt at the last fret, and we know that we can't do anything about the neck relief, short of defretting it and planing out the difference. But then again, you know, we're in the same type of place that we would be with one of those what do they call them, arch top ones I was talking about, where, if it, you know, eventually over time it will bend back. It may have reached its maximum amount of bend, we don't know, but there's a chance it will continue bending further. So the idea of this is to take this this truss rod, which is currently bent into a, beyond the flat, it's in a sort of negative curve, and what we're going to do is we're going to set up these little marker dots, and we're going to use them, just get a sense of it's halfway. We're going to use them to map the fingerboard shape as closely as possible, and it will be a very, very slight curve, as we know, and even with this, the slightest movement sends it way over the curve. So this one is a bit, I'm not really, this one's a base one is good because it's long, but it's also very, very flexible, so I have to be very, very careful with this. So we can very quickly have too much curvature in it, and then we take it off again and suddenly we've got not enough. And because it's flexible, then we have to, that's about right, just there. Could even be a fraction too much still, but when we get it to where we want, we just have to be incredibly careful to allow it to level, but then to do what leveling it needs, but then we want it to, under gravity really, to just scoop out as much as possible any I don't know what the word would be, any humps, I suppose you could call them, in the fingerboard. Now this is a little bit tricky to get some space in here to do this, because this bass guitar, I kind of need a bit of a bigger wooden spreader to do this first fret. I haven't quite got one big enough. Let's see if this piece of plastic would do a better job. Probably. Let's just start by placing it in the track, and I'm basically just going to let it, under gravity, let it kind of go up and down on this track of frets, and I'll do it on the other side of that string shortly. And straight away it's very lightly cutting the frets, but it will show, it tends to show up quite quickly where there are dips and where there are humps in the fingerboard, and it's really working lightly, so it's hardly removing any material at all. It'll be enough to show us what's happening with the neck, and as I handle it, it bends if I'm not careful. So I can see that it's cutting on the second fret a little bit. Every other fret except 6 is not, 12, 13, 14 isn't, so 14's low, 6 is a bit low. So little things like that, it shows up pretty quickly. And what we also aren't doing at this point is we're not going out to the side. So I'll try and just Not quite sure how I'll do this. I'll just try and work this to the side of the E string to make sure we get right to the edge. Running it alongside the string here, not really doing any damage to the string, just touching against it. With a 6 string, you can usually move the strings pretty well out of the way. With a bass, this first one can be trickier. So let's improve that already, I can hear. But not there. So I'm going to recalibrate it, and I'm going to concentrate on the top section. I'm going to make sure that that plays. So when I recalibrate, I'm expecting the shape to have changed a little bit. Actually, it's not bad. So now I'm going to put that apart again up here. I'm going to drop this in, and I'm going to, what I call, sort of focus a little bit more with gentle pressure on this top end. I don't want to do a load of pressure. I don't want to deform the rod so it changes too much shape, but I want to clear up that last little bit of, or that little bit of buzz sounding. Now that, to me, that's not what I would call fret buzz, that's what I would call fret slap. So I'm just using this end now to try and free up those notes, and I can see that it's cutting the second to last fret there, which is telling me that might be getting in the way of things. Better. You can hear how much that's improved from the first time, so that's definitely helping things along. What I'll do is I'm going to just continue on the edge here with this, just to kind of make sure we get right to the edge of the frets. Get on there, thank you. Get on there, get on there. A little bit difficult to reach. Forgive the noises. But yeah, you can see it's cutting up that last, second to last fret, so it's struggling a little bit with that. I'm just going to put this spreader in a little bit more and just finish off in here, and then we'll recalibrate and move to the next one. So yeah, that little bit of concentrating at the top end there has helped quite significantly reduce the fret slap going on up here, and it's focused almost entirely on that second to last fret. Okay. Let's recalibrate and check. We'll do the next track, as I call it. That's not quite curved enough, so it's come slightly loose in using it on that last bit. So that's the thing to watch out for with this particular. If it's a very flat, it tends not to keep it under tension, so it can quite easily what's the word? Yeah, de-shape itself. So what I tried to do is, at this first stage, I try and hold the rod kind of in the centre to keep its original shape, and just let it wander backwards and forwards over this what I call the B track. Now, it won't take away all of the fret wear on the first and second frets and so on, but it will it will sort of clean up a little bit of it. And then again, bring it down to the far end and sort of concentrate on that a little bit heavier, because if it's following the pattern of the E track, the G track I should call it, if it's following the same pattern, then it's very likely that the same frets will be high at that end, in that track as well. Tiny bit more. Let's try this one. I can't really turn that sideways, can I? It's too wide. Squeeze, that'll do. Just don't go popping off anywhere. So the clearance at this end is very, very small. So to get this playing cleanly, it does take a little bit of careful work to get rid of the imbalance here. Well, slightly high frets at this end. It's going to be it's not going to be 100% perfect, but it's going to be as good as we can get for that action. And if that's not ideal, then we have to take the action up very, very slightly to kind of compensate. But it's a, it's a trade-off really. Get as close as we can. That's now suddenly too bendy. It's okay. So now on the A track, I can't really. Come on. There we go. So I'm crossing over between the tracks to sort of join them up so that we get the whole area as well done as possible. So right down at 6. Ooh, yuck. Not so cool. 6 and the end. Down at 6 and right at the end. Let's see what we can do. So that was after lowering the action by 3/4 of a millimeter only. So It's kind of saying it doesn't really want to go any further than that. So let's concentrate on 6 for a minute and see if we've got a high fret there that needs knocking back a bit. It looks like it. And it's quite, it's a lot of kind of extreme work. Not extreme work, you know, you have to kind of, when you're at the lowest possible actions, everything counts. So you have to kind of get even more level the lower you set it. If you've got a hump or a twist or a, you know, a little lump at this end, it's going to show up on a very low action, and you've got no choice but to try and level it out if it's possible. Let me just check the playing actions on this, because this may be, I sort of did them a bit by eye, but it's not massively scientific. Okay. That is a bit of a crazy low action. Yeah, God Lord, that is a crazy action. So technically, this is what should happen. We should be able to undo these gently, relax these, I should say, and then we should be able to tweak our individual saddles to the height we need. And I have to say, regardless of what the neck relief is doing, we have to have a feasible action at the last fret on this bass. And 1.5 millimeters there is as low as it's going to go, but this one's now quite a bit lower. So we have to raise this up following the radius of the neck. So I should be doing that right now. Ish, that's still too low. .2 millimeters. It's very, very, very low by all accounts. Right, I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to tighten these back up to stop further movement. Unless, of course, in a minute we find we have to do intonation movement, but that will be good. Now where are we? We're on the A. Tiny bit on the top end still. Do it from this side now. Yeah, so I was a bit too low there. My sort of visual action setting was too low, so it was kind of important to raise it to what is actually currently an electric guitar action. So we have to say that whatever the guitar feels like, I'm not, there's no way you can get this at any lower action than this. Now, you know, what's possible in another world might be to reduce slightly the curvature in the neck from the 0.5 relief, but you know, even that isn't excessive by sort of normal guitar standards. I mean, it's too much for an acoustic, but sorry, for an electric, but okay, so what I'll do is I'll swing the rod to the other side of the E as well, so we get the far side of this E track as well, and a little bit more weight up here to even out this hump where it joins the body. And that's a common characteristic of all guitars with necks that are that glue into a body at some point. In particular, the Gibson range of glued in necks do that all the time. Very difficult to, that they're almost never a smooth curve because of the way the neck joins the thicker body, and the thicker body constrains the neck and stops it bending smoothly, which gives you a sort of plateau type of effect. Now this one I'm going to need to use something else to do this, so it's going to need a piece of string, not rope, string. And I brought a piece of string in here and I hung it from something, didn't I? Maybe not. I need a piece of string. It's the time, Mr. Wolf. I lost track of that too. Yeah. Why does everything take longer than I expect? Where's my string? Come on, I had some string. Not there, not there, not there. I had some string, I put it on something, tied it to something, not there. It's not there. So, right, here's a spare piece of string. What I need to do is I just need to tie this E string out the way a little bit. So I can just get to that part of the fretboard. Forgive me, other strings, for this cruelty that I do thee. And I could, technically, I could do the same up here. I could use doing the same up here. It's the only downside about the bass and the headless as well. It's not just being a bass, it's the fact that it's headless. It means it's difficult to pull the strings out of the way. So let's try and give it a little bit of a yank out of the way. Okay. Then you've got to undo it, that's the other pain. Right, okay, well, come along. getting difficult now. You know, paracord could be so sticky, grippy. Thank you, and thank you. See, there's a see the curve of this. This just will not play ball, I'm afraid, at this height. I think what it's telling me is that that's the limit to its lowness, I'm afraid. I have to make another very small adjustment. Let's see if we can. And that's guitar height, I'm afraid. Barely above guitar height. I think, given the radius of this neck, I think that's about, we're going to go from 1.5, 1.75 to 1.5, 1.6 to 1. It's going to be 1.4-ish, 1.4-ish and 1.2-ish. So that's about as good as we're going to get it. So what I'll do as the next phase of this, I'm going to remove the strings, tighten up the... Don't tell me I can't actually get that one out without moving the block again. Of course, I've found we're in that conundrum. Anyway, what I'll do is I'll mask off the whole fretboard, and tomorrow probably I will polish this all out, and then we'll get into sanding and polishing the frets, and then that will be it done. But you know, it's as much improvement on the action as we're going to get. But I have to say, it is remarkably low, all things considered. You've got to be very realistic about that. Can I get this out? Will it come out? Will it come out? No, it's in the way, and it's... Oh, will it come out that side? Maybe. If it comes out here, it might. Maybe. Yes. Now, which end is which? That end. Right now, I don't rightly know, but let's give this a clean. That can stay there then, because I don't have to move anything. I'll give this a quick rub down. I've got to go and rescue my string from the other room. Right, I think we're sort of needing some fresh rags now. Everything ends up in the bin eventually. I'll do this again once I've finished the sanding and polishing. Next thing I'll do is just re-crown the frets, so remove any flat spots created by the fret level. Like I said at the beginning, the purpose of the fret level on this was more to get that extra little bit of room, as much room as possible in the playing kind of thing, as much room as possible to allow it to be played as low as possible. But we've reached the limits of it, both in terms of we can't do anything about the neck relief, and I can't do any more with the frets are level for a low action. And I think perhaps I suspect the only improvement we could make at the top end there would be to get the hex keys again and fit them here and hold the strings so you've got clean string rather than the kind of kicked up string, which I think is raising the action at this end. I could be wrong, but I have a feeling it is, and if it is, that would be just a place to improve its playability and the feel of it. One of the things we talked about, John and me, the other day was, he asked if it was, could it be sanded flat and, reshaped, get rid of the permanent curve. And I think, after discussing it, we both agreed that for an old classic guitar like this, it really probably be better to leave it in its original form, because it's a sort of collector's piece, and this isn't changing it in any significant way. This is just leveling the frets a little bit and also scooping out a little bit of space at the same time. Hardly any material taken out to do this. It's a very minimal process, even though it can look like a lot, because it takes a while to be very precise and careful. Yeah, I think there's some absolutes involved here, and I know for a fact that you can't put a bass action at the last fret as low as an electric guitar action. It just won't tolerate it. The strings have got to move more. They're bigger, looser by comparison, and they will move more compared to an electric guitar. Most electric guitar standard scale length will. So if you're looking at this guitar, 1.75 last fret action on this is as low as it feasibly can go. As we know, the combination of the physical action and the addition of curvature or relief at the middle part of the neck does increase the feeling of tallness, but usually around this area here. If it's just a sort of standard feeling of the action increasing as you go up here, then it's usually the last fret playing issue. Sometimes people describe it as that, and actually it can turn out to be a combination of both those things, but also a mixture of the first fret being higher than it needs to be, and that actually tires you out quicker than a high action at this end area I'm working on now. So getting that first fret right, and I'm not convinced, I don't 100% know that I'm right about the way that those wound, twisted bits of string go over that first fret, but I have a feeling that it's stiffer and it throws them up away from the fret, so you get a rise straight off that 0 fret, and I think it's making the first fret action higher than it should be. And if that's the case, then it's going to be making it feel harder to play than it needs to feel, certainly at that end as well. But it contributes to the overall feeling of difficulty to play. So I would, if you've still got the original, this was high fret, definitely a high fret getting in the way. But if you've got the original grub screws, I would suggest getting some one-ended strings and loading them on that trays at that end, and then running them out through here and locking them down and cutting them off. I know people don't like the sort of sticky out bits, but if you cut them as close as you can, it should be all right. And then see if it improves the first fret action, and then if it does, I suspect it might. If it does, then see how much that improves the overall feel of the guitar to play. I think that probably would be a good experiment sometime fairly soon. Okay, so I'm just taking off a load of the dust and the marker pen to begin with. I'm going to put my paraphernalia of, what's that stuff called, fret leveling, away in its various places. You can stick on there. Can you stick? Yes, you can. Okay, so like I say, I'll finish this tomorrow, but what I'll do between now and then, when I see you again, oops, I forgot this bit, I will mask off all the frets like so, in order to polish them out and get them all nice and shiny, but without risking any damage to the fingerboard, which is what we don't want to do. As far as the 0 fret goes, it is notched, but because it's a bass guitar, it's not such a big deal as the notches that you get on an electric 6-string or an acoustic, but particularly the 6-string, because of the bending. When you bend on a 6-string, it tends to drive the string sideways across the 0 fret, and quite often they can start clicking as they move and jump out of the notches, which is pretty horrible. Now, I suppose when you compare a 0 fret to a nut, obviously when you push string sideways down near the nut, when you have a nut, they don't move sideways because the slots in the nut prevent that. But in the case of a 0 fret whether on a bass or a 6-string, because there's no, if there's a nut directly behind a traditional nut for positioning of the strings, directly behind the 0 fret, which there can be quite often is on arch tops, for example, you'll still get the notching on the 0 fret, but you won't experience it too much, because if you do bend the strings kind of down that area, the slots in the nut plastic or whatever nut directly behind the 0 fret do a pretty good job of holding the strings in place, and therefore they don't kind of jump out of their slots or their notches, and you tend not to get that horrible noise or the horrible clicking Okay, so that's the first load of masking tape. I've got to go and cut some more now to scale, to size. Actually, I may have a load already cut on here from yesterday. Yeah, so so the zero fret is a funny beast. I mean, one of the reasons why it's such a good thing in and of itself is that it's pretty much the only way that you can guarantee a good low playing action at the first fret on a guitar without having to mess around with nut slots, or in my case adjustable nuts. So the zero fret sets the first fret action just by virtue of the geometry of the guitar's playing action, and so even actually people, like in the case of this guitar, manufacturers very often put extra large fret wire on to make sure that the zero fret lifts the strings above to a certain, quite high above the first fret. The interesting part is that the geometry of the guitar will create a gap for you even if you use exactly the same fret gauge for your zero fret as you do for all the rest of the frets. So you don't technically need to use a bigger gauge. In fact, I find what happens is when you do use a bigger gauge, you tend to get back into the sort of, I don't know, almost 0.5 millimeters, and you're verging on that height that you don't want to be at, which is where you start getting detuning. So for me, I absolutely don't feel very comfortable using a much bigger gauge at all. I think the manufacturers use a bigger gauge because they know full well that the nature of the zero fret is that it will be notched very quickly, and the guitar is likely to be back in at a luthier's within 6 months to a year even of purchase, with the player saying, I want you to dress out these notches in my zero fret. And of course, having a taller zero fret gives you an opportunity to do that a couple of times before you run out of fret metal. As I say, the nature of zero frets is that notching will happen whether you like it or not. So if you start with low fret wire, from the seller's point of view, or the retailer, manufacturer and retailer's point of view, if you start with a normal same gauge wire as you've used in the rest of the neck, from my point of view, it will give you a better playing action. It will give you actually the almost perfect first fret action by dint of the geometry of the action, the basic action set at this end will create the perfect clearance at that end. But from the manufacturer's point of view is it won't leave them very long before it's notched and the owner wants it dressed. And if you don't have a bit of extra material, then what a dressing will actually turn into a refret. Now, personally, I think refretting the zero fret, replacing the zero fret is a much better option than dressing it, because the zero fret, each time you dress it, it'll change the action a little bit, and you'll go from, I don't know, let's say you buy the guitar and it comes with a 0.5 millimeters action at the first fret because they've used a bigger gauge like on this guitar, and then 6 months later you notice it's worn. You go to your luthier or back to the manufacturer and you say, I'm not happy with this, I want you to I want you to dress it out for me, and they do that, and then suddenly your action at the first fret now has gone down to from 0.5 to 0.3, and it suddenly feels different. So that's what will guarantee to happen. So I think replacing it with the same gauge each time probably makes sense, and the same gauge as you've got on your guitar, in which case it won't feel like a big change every time. Okay, so I'm going to probably do this, say, tomorrow. I'm tempted to do it now because I always like getting things finished. 10 to 9. Why don't I just finish it now, because if I don't, it'll drag on into tomorrow's work. So I think I'll finish it now, but I'll do it a bit off camera anyway, because it's the nature of the beast, because it's noisy. So I'll come back and see it when I'm putting the original strings back on, and I've polished the frets, all polished out, sanded and polished out, and then we'll restring. So see you in a minute. Right, okay, so frets all polished out, everything cleaned, time to re-thread and stuff everything. So there we go. In fact, let's start. Let's get this in sideways. It's a little bit difficult. Right, there we go. Over the top. Okie dokie, so yeah, having given it a polish out, nearly time. I thought I'd finish it today because, like I say, it's better than leaving it till tomorrow. Now, the problem I've got right now is I can't seem to get this to go in here. There we are. Stay in. Stay in. Come on, go in there. For some reason, now it's taken a while to bite onto the thread there. So for a headless guitar, these, I don't know what we're looking at, I'm so sorry. For a headless guitar, these knurled thumb tuners are actually pretty good on this. They should be that size on electric headless guitars, but they aren't, because there's not enough room usually. But they ought to be that size if we are to use them properly without creating separate sort of rebates off to the sides or behind the tuners, which I don't ever think works very well anyway. But hey, I could use these. They are usable. Okay, well, not bad. Oops, not too bad to get restrung. A little bit finicky, but actually not too bad at all. Let's get a Okay, so we have the guitar fret leveled, polished out, and strings replaced. Okie dokie. That's gonna call it time on this one. Been interesting, kind of limited amount of success, but we are up against certain limits with this that can't be got around really. So there we have it.